Ladies and gentlemen, fellow South Africans, Bagaetso, Dumelang. It's really great to be here. It's a great opportunity for me to address you. I stand before you as a child of Soweto, a proudly black South African, a son of the African soil. I stand proud to live in a country that is no longer the skunk of the world. Proud that out of the ashes of apartheid, a new nation could arise. I am a product of the Group Areas Act, the Population Registration Act, and the 1913 Land Act. I was born 4 years after the Soweto uprising. But the struggle that began at Morris Isaacson High School was my struggle. And the desire to break down the last vestiges of Bantu education still burns within me. Because, fellow South Africans, Democrats, I cannot be free while our people are still in chains. We remain bound together by our shared history and common destiny. I stand before you as an individual with the right to decide for myself how to think and how to feel. No pencil test can define me or any of us. I am so much more than the color of my skin. But I will never deny who I am and the forces that shape me. I will never forget where I come from. Apartheid may be history, but the racism that nurtured and sustained it continues to this day. South Africans, racism demeans us. All of us, black and white. It opens the wounds of its victims and exposes the ignorance of those who perpetrated. It robs us of the dignity that so many fought for. And racism divides us. Just look at us. At the very moment we need to be standing together, we're being torn apart. It doesn't have to be this way. And when I look back, I still at times marvel at what we've achieved together. Many, in fact, some said we had no chance. They said our history was just too unfair. It was just too brutal. They said that the scars inflicted by centuries of colonial rule and half a century of apartheid laws were just too deep. They said forgiveness and reconciliation were impossible. And then came along a leader who taught us that our scars would not be healed by more hatred, but only by love and understanding. The humble man, incarcerated for 27 years for fighting against racial domination, was the embodiment of forgiveness and reconciliation. He urged each one of us to look beyond our differences and find our common humanity. And so we did. Like in a marriage, we made a commitment to each other. Our anti-nuptial agreement was the constitution that was signed 20 years ago on the 8th of May, 1996. On that day, we vowed to respect each other. We vowed to grow old together. We vowed to stick together through thick and thin, in sickness and in health. At first, our relationship flourished. We celebrated each other's successes as if they were our own. But when tragedy struck, we mourned together. But when the honeymoon ended, we found that we hardly knew each other. Now, after 2 decades, we sometimes struggle to recall what we saw in each other in the first place. Because 2 decades into a new democracy, it does feel as though we are drifting apart again. Part of the problem is that we, as Black South Africans, are still made to feel inferior because of the color of our skin. And this inferiority runs deep. I remember growing up, not far from here, we used to refer to successful black people and we'd say to them, "Eita ngamla." It's another word for white person. I can't tell you how many times I'm told by Black South Africans that I have done well because I happen to be married to a white South African. Apartheid was so dehumanizing that often, even today, white South African remain the benchmark that we set for ourselves. South Africans, Democrats, how can this be? We need to ask some difficult questions. And as a Black South African, we are entitled to ask uncomfortable questions. We're entitled to ask, why is it today, 21 years on, a black child is 100 times more likely than a white child to grow up in poverty? 100 times. We're entitled to ask, why is it that a white learner is 6 times more likely to get into university than a black learner? We're entitled to ask, why is unemployment at this level for young Black South Africans is still today well over 60%. There is a passage in Nick Mhlongo's novel, After Tears, which captures the hopelessness so many feel. He quotes, and as he says this, after graduating from university, the protagonist in the story arrives back in the township only to be told by his uncle's friend, open quote, "If you are black and you failed to get rich in the first years of our democracy when Tata Mandela came into power, you must forget it, my brother. The gravy train has passed you by, and like me, you live in poverty until your beard turns gray." Close quote. The bridge between the stinking rich and the poor has been demolished. That is the harsh reality of our democracy. All South Africans, black and white, we must talk about the persistence of racialized inequality 20 years after the end of apartheid. And if we believe this government has failed to redress apartheid's legacy, then we must be able to say so as well. Democrats, fellow South Africans, there can be no conversation more important than this one. It is a conversation that we must keep having until the structural inequalities of our society have been flattened. Sadly, this conversation is interrupted every time a racist incident hits the headlines and explodes onto our social media. Suddenly, we're back to square one. The injury of racial inequality is compounded by the insult of racism. It is like pouring salt into a deep wound. No wonder so many people are angry about racism. I am one of them. We must be angry about the acts of people who are racist. So let me be clear. I want to say this. This far and no further. It is indeed time that we draw a line in the sand against racism. Now I know that there are many people in South Africa of all races who truly believe in non-racialism. I know that the vast majority of white South Africans don't think like Penny Sparrow does. And I know that many South Africans are playing their part to redress the legacy of the past. But I also know that for every racist incident that makes the front pages and trends on Twitter, there are hundreds that don't. I know that there are people who each other around braais as if we're still living in the 1970s. And I think every single one of us would say we know somebody who likes starting a sentence with, "I'm not racist, but..." Every incident of overt racism, there are thousands of instances of casual, everyday racism. It manifests itself in simple ways like talking down to people, laughing when people pronounce an English word differently, not bothering to acknowledge people. In fact, believing somebody's accent is a sign of their intelligence. These Democrats are all subtle forms of racial superiority. And it is time we all acknowledge how damaging they are. Because repeated over time, they erode the goodwill that once existed between us. It is equally important to acknowledge that racism is not the preserve of one group. To say that black people are not capable of prejudice is itself a twisted form of racism. As Advocate Thuli Madonsela reminds us, being a victim of systemic racism and structural racial discrimination does not exempt you from being a racist. I could not agree more. You see, we all have the capacity for greatness, but equally so, we all have the capacity for prejudice. That is what equality is about. So fellow South Africans, Democrats, Bagaetsho, I still believe that most people in our country, black and white, feel a deep sense, an abiding sense of a shared destiny. More than anything, they want this imperfect union to succeed. And yet, we're talking past each other. We're not listening to each other. And in fact, when we don't listen, it's like the meaning is lost in translation. It reminds me of a poem penned by Roger McGough entitled You and I. It goes like this. I explain quietly. You hear me shouting. You try a new tack. I feel old wounds reopen. You see both sides. I see your blinkers. I am placatory. You sense a new selfishness. I am a dove. You recognize the hawk. You offer an olive branch. I feel the thorns. You bleed. I see crocodile tears. I withdraw. You reel from the impact. Fellow South Africans, we need to find each other again. We need to recognize what we saw in each other all those years ago. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I have all the answers. I don't think anybody does. But what I do know is that any road to reconciliation starts with a conversation. So over the coming weeks, as leader of the official opposition, I will initiate a dialogue on race entitled Stand Up, Speak Out, involving South Africans from all walks of life. These dialogues will not be dominated by public reps, nor will it be conducted under a party political banner. People have had enough of politicians telling them how to think and how to feel. I believe it's time that we allow South Africans to talk for a change. But having said that, as a political leader, I have specific responsibilities that I will not shy from. And as leader of the Democratic Alliance, I'm all too aware of the unique challenges we face as a party. What we're trying to do is being done by very few parties and has been achieved by very few anywhere in the world. We are attempting to bring people together across the color line on the basis of shared values. But I want to be clear that this does not mean we ignore race. When I was elected at our Congress last year, I told the delegates at our federal Congress that if you don't see that I'm black, then you don't see me. Racial injustice is real and we need to address it. We cannot wish it away by pretending that we are colorblind. Democrats, I'm proud of the fact that the DA is the most diverse party in South Africa's history. I am proud that we stand up for the rights of each individual to be what they want to be, regardless of the color of their skins. But the DA is not perfect. No political party is. And I want to be quite clear about where I stand. We have a duty, all of us, to act against all of those who engage in racial discrimination and racial mobilization. Because, Democrats, there is no place, and let me say that again, there is no place in the DA for people who believe that the color of their skin renders them superior to others. No DA member must be satisfied until we fundamentally address the structural inequality of our society. We must, as we've affirmed, build a society based on the values of freedom, fairness, and opportunity. I call on each one of you that no DA member must ever turn a blind eye to racism, no matter how subtle or coded it may be. We need to call people out on their behavior, even when confronting them will make us feel uncomfortable. We have a duty to stand up and speak out again for our values. Because racists are not welcome in the DA. I want to go a step further and say this. If you are thinking of voting for the DA and you are a racist, please don't vote for us. We are not a party for you. I will not tolerate racism in the party I lead. And this is why I will soon be introducing an anti-racism pledge that every new and returning member will be required to sign when it will read like this. I pledge to uphold the values of the Constitution, to cherish the vision for a united, non-racial, democratic South Africa, and to nourish this vision in my personal conduct. I acknowledge that apartheid was an evil system, yes, and recognize its legacy remains reflected in the unequal structure of the South African society today. I reject discrimination in all of its forms and pledge to help root it out wherever I encounter it in South Africa. I will not perpetuate racial division and will never undermine the dignity of my fellow South Africans. Instead, I will commit myself to working to overcome inequality and achieving a shared prosperity. Members found to be in clear violation of this oath will have their party membership immediately revoked, no questions asked. Let us, Democrats, send out a message that racism has no place in our politics. The DA may be the most diverse party in South Africa, but we're not diverse enough. We must continue to embrace the rich diversity of South Africa with all of its challenges and its contradictions. If we do not, we will not be able to have an honest conversation about our divided past. Nor will we be in a position to craft our shared future. And so, from today, I will require our structures at constituency, regional, and provincial levels to set targets for recruitment and development of candidates for public office. These targets and the progress made towards achieving them will be reviewed regularly by a federal executive. My objective is simply this, that by 2019, our parliamentary and legislature caucuses and councils and our decision-making structures and our executive at all levels will reflect the diversity of our complex society. And we will do it without resorting to dehumanizing quotas that reduce human beings to statistics. Finally, in the coming weeks, I will introduce a policy document for adoption at our Federal Council that sets out a vision for a fair South Africa. This is an urgent council, Democrats. It's an important moment for all of us. This document focuses itself as a plan to overcome the structural inequalities that continue to divide us. At the heart of it is the recognition that the majority of Black South Africans remain locked out of opportunity. The policy identifies the key obstacles to redressing this inequality, including our unequal education system, the skewed patterns of land ownership, the uneven access to justice, and the concentration of capital in a few hands. Ultimately, the only way to redress apartheid's legacy is to ensure that every child, no matter what their circumstances is, has the best chance to be what they can be. This does mean, Democrats, that we need a Black economic empowerment that benefits poor Black South Africans. Not the politically connected, not the elite, but we really begin to address the structural inequalities and benefit the poor in our country. It means that we must ensure that Black South Africans benefit from an efficient and sustainable land reform program. It means for our governments and for everywhere we are, we must focus on spatial development that undoes the separate and unequal development of apartheid. It means ensuring that our children receive an education that prepares them to compete with anyone in the world. And it does mean that we'll be building an inclusive and a growing economy that creates jobs so that every single one of us can prosper together. Bagaetsho, fellow Democrats, South Africans, in conclusion, there can be no denying that we stand at a difficult juncture in our history. But I know we can overcome any challenge if we stand together. We have done it before, and we shall do it again. I draw inspiration from the first treason trial in 1956. We must never forget that black, white, Indian, and colored South Africans stood trial together that year. They were united around shared values, the ideals of a non-racial South Africa and the freedom of black South Africans. This struggle we must continue. So I ask you and I invite you, South Africans and Democrats, let us stand together against racism. Let us acknowledge and confront the harsh material realities that so many black South Africans still face. Let us find each other again, and let us build a nation where we can prosper together. And let us go into a future as one people with one shared destiny. Amorena abuluke sitjhaba sayeso. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our beautiful land.